Season 14 is already shaking up the meta with new weapons, a new legend, a reworked King's Canyon, and countless of changes that take legends out of the meta, but also bring some other ones from the bottom of this list all the way up to the S tier. And as far as the board goes, it is completely shuffled. As such, I figured it's time that we release a tier list covering all of the legends for Apex Legends Season 14. Normally the tiers range from F to S+, but this new season has raised the legend floor a little bit, so I would be ranking the legends from D to S instead, but one legend just had to screw all of that up. And obviously we'll give an explanation as to why. Keep in mind that this is all theory crafting based on paper factors, but it's always fun to come back later on in the season and see how far off we were and how it developed. The rankings are weighed on pubs, ranked, and competitive value, and context is important. For example, if some of the legends on this list end up not being as strong as expected, that does mean that the deck gets completely shuffled. But that's enough of disclaimers, let's dive into it, and if you disagree with anything, let me know in the comments. Let's just get that one F tier legend out of the way so we can move on with the list, and of course that's going to be Revenant. His passive Deathstalker allows you to sneak around and move faster when crouching, and allows you to climb faster and higher, but these abilities are pretty useless because you're a big and easy to hit chunky robot, and climbing faster or sneaking around won't really change that. As for his tactical, the silence is decent, but overall doesn't do much proactively, and instead it's a reactive ability that at best stops a character in their tracks for a few moments. His ultimate Death Totem did receive a small change this season, but it was just a quality of life change that stops you from instantly placing your totem when you press the ultimate. The ultimate itself is kind of useless ever since its nerf with the loud sound effect and the visual effect warning everyone that it is getting deployed and where it's being deployed from. And Revenant relies on other movement legends to have the actual utility to get his desired effect. He is overall a chore to have in your team and needs to be synergized with other legends just to be of any value. So that's why he's the only one in the F tier. Next up is the D tier, and these are legends that barely have any use at all or have one useful thing or so. So let's start with the new Apex Legend, Vantage. Her passive is pretty interesting, as aiming at an enemy will give you information on them and their team, including how many are alive and let's say what armors they have. She is also supposed to have a bullet drop indicator for long range weapons, but it seems to be broken and not really worked for the moment. That being said, I try not to include a bug that clearly will get fixed in these types of evaluations. The coolest and most fun part of her kit is her tactical, which allows you to send a companion around and leap to it whenever you want, as long as you're in line of sight. You can even double jump in any direction that you want, and there's some really interesting advanced movement techniques that are actually being discovered as we speak for Vantage using Echo, but a lot of them are based on bugs. I think that most of them will get fixed very shortly, and most of them are unknown, so I don't think we could put her higher than a D tier. That being said, if these bugs remain in the game and this movement potential remains in the game, I might actually have to bump her up to a C tier. And finally, there's her ultimate, which is a third weapon, which is a sniper rifle that deals 50 damage for the first shot and double the damage on consecutive shots on the same target, as well as marking the enemy to your teammates, who now do 15% more damage against them. But her hitbox is very large, pretty close to Caustic's, meaning that you will struggle in duels, which makes the good mobility sort of wasted. She's also very clunky to play with half of a second delay to move your companion around, and almost 2 whole seconds to even start a leap. The sniper is pretty decent and might actually be the strength of her kit, actually, especially if you don't respect it, but it leaves a very visible laser trail that gives away your position. All in all, she's a cool legend, but doesn't really provide anything useful to her team other than her passive, and I guess maybe her ultimate because it does provide a lot of damage. And you really only need to know a full team's shields and how many of them are alive in very niche situations. To be fair, Vantage is a recon legend and can scan beacons to get the next ring, but that's already covered with Seer and Valkyrie in the meta. At the end of the day, she's a very selfish legend with selfish abilities, and I don't think that she provides enough to an overall team composition to put her any higher than the D tier. The next legend in the D tier is Lifeline. Lifeline is another legend that kind of was in a bad spot or stuck in a power creep limbo, and even more so with the rise of Newcastle. Lifeline's kit is very outdated, and as I have covered in previous videos, this is despite Respawn's best efforts. The real power lies in her passive that allows Lifeline to revive both of her teammates at once while not needing to be stuck in an animation and unable to fight back. This allows her to be ready to deal with incoming teams, heal herself up, or loot up, or really whatever she feels like. But the thing is, while this is a pretty strong passive, and it is pretty hard to counter actually, it's incredibly niche and you really only get value from it when your teammates are already down. This wouldn't be a problem if her passive or ultimate had any real use on their own, but the tactical is a small drone that floats around and slowly heals health, and her ultimate just gives you better loot at a hefty 3.5 minute cooldown. There was a minor tweak in recent patches, but nothing that makes her more valuable, and again, she's losing out hard when it comes to power creep, and as such, she sits in a D tier. So what about C tier? Let's start with a legend I couldn't decide whether to place in C or D tier, since it comes down to what legends and playstyle everyone starts running. We're talking about a legend who's had a rough fall from grace, namely Gibraltar. Gibraltar has been oppressive for what, 8 seasons? As of most pick, thanks to his strong duelist kit due to his fortify coupled with his gun shield, along with his bubble providing infinitely valuable cover, and his ultimate being a good way to clear out open areas and providing space. Overall, he's been a strong duelist and one of the best legends to create and manipulate space. So why? Why is he C tier? Gibraltar was already struggling in the later part of season 13 with the rise of Mad Maggie, since the meta composition was turning into Maggie, Seer, and Valkyrie. Maggie and Seer synergized pretty damn well, and Valkyrie was a must pick. In season 13, Maggie was already a soft counter to Gibraltar's bubble, and even more so now with her buffs, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. And Seer's tactical turned everyone in the bubble into easy targets and canceled Gibraltar's bubble revives as well. There's also a degree of yin and yang between Gibraltar and Newcastle, and since Newcastle receives massive buffs, he might actually be able to do Gibraltar's job better than the man himself. I can still see players running Gibraltar in all facets of play, but for the moment, I'm going to be putting him in the bottom of the C tier. Mirage is another legend that's strongly sitting in the C tier, and before you give me the, oh, he actually received a buff? Really? What buff? Because yes, the decoys weren't properly being picked up by a serious exhibit and will actually, show up, and of course, your decoys will now get scanned by Valkyrie's passive when she's flying, but it actually doesn't make that much of a difference in his overall kit. His passive is still incredibly one-dimensional and easy to outplay if you're half decent at the game, since there is a sound when he revives, and it's pretty easy to guess where Mirage actually is reviving from if you've been paying attention. His tactical could be used to fool the enemy, but most players have learned how to deal with it, and finally his ultimate has some juke and outplay potential, but Mirage is overall just a duelist, and he falls short the second that he's fighting more than one enemy, or he has one or both abilities on cooldown, and he provides near zero team play utility. The buff keeps him in C tier at best, because thanks to this new patch, there is some potential to bamboozle legends that have been on top of the meta, but he's just not good enough to fully counter them or actually to be picked in their stead. Another legend in the C tier is going to be another controversial pick, and I can already hear the comments about this one, so let's just dive right in. Horizon. Horizon is C tier now. Why? Why is Horizon C tier? We all know how she works, with the passive giving you a glide and removing false stun, her tactical giving you a gravity lift to her and her team, as well as her ultimate, the black hole, sucking enemies in for easy targets and highlighting them to make them easy to shoot, grenade, or otherwise get free kills. So why is she C tier? This might come as a shock if you didn't watch my previous video with the season 14 tips. Respawn again accidentally omitted a very large change to her kit. While we know that the black hole hitbox has been adjusted to actually, break when you're shooting at it, and we know that it takes 15% more damage from explosives, they accidentally omitted the fact that it actually takes friendly fire. This means that if you black hole an enemy, they can destroy the black hole much easier, and if you throw, say, a frag grenade into it, it will deal 150 damage to the newt, and by then, since the enemy is shooting it, it probably will break it. Since the black hole no longer is a free kill, it's actually kind of weak, and Horizon really only has one team play value, which is her gravity lift, which is why she's all the way down in C tier. I feel like she belongs in this tier because she really only works in specific situations, and she has very little utility outside of her tactical. You probably have a good idea what C tier means now. So next up is Pathfinder, who actually has a lot more in common with Vantage role-wise now that I'm thinking about it, but ultimately just does the same things but better. Contrary to popular belief, he does have a passive, albeit useless, where scanning a beacon will refund your zipline and give you a cooldown reduction of 10 seconds per beacon up to 4 times. His tactical is actually the biggest part of his kit, which is his grapple. The grapple has infinite uses and is a movement ability that lets Pathfinder traverse horizontally, take height, or make insane movement plays to fly across the map quickly. The skill ceiling is a lot higher, and the range and versatility of his grapple greatly trumps Vantage's. Not to mention it doesn't take over 2 seconds to activate. His ultimate isn't the most useful, but it does have some uses in rotating fast, taking high ground in the mid to late game, or jumping around to stay alive for a little longer. Just like Vantage, he has a big hitbox and needs to be careful about taking his 1v1s, so he should always try to stay on flanks or high grounds, but he does all of this way better than Vantage because he can grapple farther, and he even has a shorter cooldown than her. Pathfinder is a recon legend, and he scans beacons to get the next ring, but again, that's already covered with Seer and Valkyrie in the meta. Another legend in the C tier is a legend that actually is pretty solid. She just falls short as we're currently in a scan meta, and there's no signs of that improving. I'm of course talking about Shiv's favorite pick, Bangalore. Bangalore has a great passive that makes her a strong duelist, which gives her a movement speed buff whenever she takes fire. Her tactical, the smoke canister, allows her to smoke off entire teams or rotate forward, create smoke walls in open areas, or smoke right on top of herself or an enemy to then scan with another legend or digital threat to kill them when they are blinded. Her ultimate Barrage is pretty good as well, providing even more space. You can hold off an entire team from pushing for a good 20 or so seconds, or even throw it straight towards a team that you want to push into, and then run after the explosions and take the position that you want. Just like with Gibraltar, she is good at manipulating space and has a good duel ability, but still, at the end of the day, she does fall short, because Seer is meta, Bloodhound is sorta meta, Valkyrie is definitely meta, and our new favorite Legend Vantage exists. All of these wall hacks make Bangalore's main ability pretty useless, and sadly keeps her down in the C tier. It doesn't help that you don't know whether your enemies will be able to see you through the smokes or not as well, since there's actually no way of knowing whether someone has a digital threat before the fact. And finally, the last legend in the C tier is Octane. Octane is pretty good in general with his explosive gameplay, a fairly useful passive and tactical, and a pretty damn good ultimate with his jump pad. The passive gives Octane slow health regeneration outside of combat and goes hand in hand with his stim, where Octane trades some of his health to go faster for a short amount of time. The reason that Octane is C tier is because while he has a good team utility with his ultimate, the jump pad sends you in a very predictable direction and it's very easy to beam. And as of a few patches ago, you can't actually accurately shoot back from it either, making you an easy target for whoever you're jump padding towards or even away from. He has very little mid to end game potential as well because of these reasons, and all of these things combined means he fails to make a case to place any higher than the C tier. Now let's move into the B tier, but before we do that, be sure to hit the like on the video. Why do they make me? These legends are pretty good and can see the play in the meta, but they require a specific composition to see their full potential. The reason that they're still in the B tier is because the legends needed to build these compositions either are in B tier as well or in higher tiers as well. So let's start off with Crypto. Last season I ranked him way too high with the S tier because I just believed that much in him. But the meta didn't take a turn for a slow passive meta and instead turned into an aggressive slugfest, which sort of pushed Crypto aside. Crypto flourishes in slow passive bunker metas and might actually be very valuable this season, but at the end of the day it comes down to what legends are popular and how the lobbies will play out. Crypto's passive Neuralink is another wall hack ability which reveals and highlights enemies visible from Crypto's drone to both Crypto and to his teammates, whether you are inside of the drone or not. The drone is his tactical, which Crypto can go into at any time and fly around to scout around or to use his ultimate, which is a quick EMP burst that breaks the armors and slows all the enemies and Crypto within a 30-meter dome radius. Thing is, a good Crypto push is extremely hard to counter, with Crypto setting up the drone to then detonate the EMP right before he and his teammates can push in, but really only works against teams that are playing passive or are bunkering up. He is a recon character, so he too can scan beacons, but Crypto can also send his drone to scan the beacon in his stead. This will instantly scan the beacon without risking Crypto dying on top of the beacon mid-animation. Just like Maggie, Crypto breaks Gibraltar's bubble, but he doesn't have much use against Newcastle or teams who play in the open. So again, this is very meta dependent. Next up is Bloodhound, who at this point basically just is a worse Seer, but they can run faster. Their passive allows you to see enemies' footsteps to see if somebody recently was in the area, and the tactical is the main part of the kit, allowing Bloodhound to scan and reveal enemies within a 125-degree cone up to 75 meters away. And the ultimate allows Bloodhound to run faster, see enemies through visual obstructions such as smokes, and get a major reduction to their tactical's cooldown. And they also have the duration of their ultimate become longer for every kill that they get when they are in the ultimate. We're in a scan meta, and Bloodhound is easier to use, but they are significantly weaker than Seer, who also has a scan passive but can see enemies through walls at any given time, including ones that have just been sitting around. It's effectively a legal wall hack. In addition to this tactical that lasts for 8 seconds instead of Bloodhound's free, and not only does it also reveal the enemy, but it shows their health bars above their head, cancels any channeled action, revives, and silences them for 1.25 seconds after they are hit. Now don't get me wrong, Bloodhound is still a decent pick, but they're in the B tier because Seer exists, and also some other meta picks. It's a balance thing. Bloodhound is also a recon legend, and they can scan beacons. Another legend in the B tier is Wraith, who is still pretty strong, especially in some bunker metas, but she isn't really the core of any roster anymore, and is pretty much useless on large open maps such as Stormpoint, since her portal isn't long enough to reach between cover, and she's exposed to the entire server whenever she tries to make a portal play. Wraith's passive, Hindsight of the Void, is supposed to warn you if somebody aims at you or if there are enemies or traps nearby, but seems to only go off when it's way too late. Her tactical is pretty good, but much like Vantage, feels a bit clunky, and you need to wait for an over a second long animation before finally entering the void, and then being able to either push forward or retreat to your teammates. And her ultimate opens a portal up to 75 meters away. That's pretty useful for rotating, especially in the end game. Wraith's job is to either flank or be a portal slave for her team, but again, she can't really do her job on Stormpoint due to the open spaces and all of the verticality, which holds her back in the B tier. She shines on maps like World's Edge, however, which is why she still stays this high up the list. Ashe is the legend on the other side of the coin, seeing very little play on maps like World's Edge, but shining as the aggressor pick on Stormpoint, being unbothered by vertical limitations or open areas. On the contrary, she shines in it. Her passive is also useful to find enemies that she can engage in fights with or to set up ambushes, as it marks death boxes on the map to show you where enemies have been fighting in the last 3 minutes. Her tactical isn't as good, but gives a little bit of poke without wasting resources, as well as having some niche uses as it can snare an enemy and stop them from running away for about 3 seconds. The ultimate phase tier can go up to 62.5 meters away in any direction and gives her the explosiveness for her and her own team that Octane and Pathfinder could only dream of, and the only real counter to the portal is if you made a mistake and placed the portal poorly in view of the enemy team. Otherwise, she'll appear next to your enemies almost instantaneously without getting shot back. She's again very valuable on Stormpoint and has seen some play on other maps, but doesn't shine as well on World's Edge as Wraith does. If we're heading into an open space aggressive meta, we might see more Ashe being picked for all-in capability, but time will tell. Rampart also finds her place in the B tier because of the off chance that we're heading into a bunker meta, and even more so with Newcastle making the rounds. Let me explain. Newcastle's ultimate is perfectly sized for Rampart to put their barriers in between and making their own setup impenetrable, allowing both of these legends to create permanent space out of thin air in most open areas. Her tactical modded loader increases magazine size by 15% and decreases reload time by 25% whenever she uses LMGs such as the Spitfire, the Rampage, or the L-Star, or I guess her minigun. And her tactical amped cover allows you to place up to 5 one-way barriers at a time that blocks incoming shots and boosts outgoing damage by 20%. Her ultimate goes hand in hand with bunkering and can either act as a secondary handheld weapon, much like Vantage's ultimate, or be placed as a minigun that anybody can use. The minigun itself doesn't serve much of a purpose when placed, as it needs to be revved up and turns you into an easy kill, but it is pretty strong when taking fights in its mobile mode. Rampart is pretty strong as a base legend, but her abilities scale exponentially when coupled with at least one more bunker legend such as Newcastle, Wattson, or Caustic. It's also funny because while she synergizes with a Newcastle, Rampart's ultimate is also a great way to counter enemy Newcastles as well, as it can easily destroy the entire shield in one magazine without wasting any actual ammunition. Another B tier legend that is meta reliant is Fuse, and hear me out here. Fuse hasn't really found a spot in the meta ever since he was released because he just didn't have any use. His passive Grenadier allows you to stack an extra grenade per inventory slot, fire grenades faster, farther, and more accurately, and even helps Fuse track the bounces of frag grenades. His tactical Knuckle Cluster launches a cluster bomb that continuously expels airburst grenades on impact, making it a perfect tool to deny legends angles and space for 6 seconds per cluster. Especially, and this is an important point, meta legends such as Newcastle, who has plenty of angles that his wall can be naded from for good value. Apparently, you can also stick 2 Knuckle Clusters on Maggie's ultimate and this will break it, so make of that what you will. His ultimate, the Motherload, launches a bombardment that encircles the target in a wall of flame and highlights any enemies inside of the large circle for 17 seconds while dealing good damage to the ones who touch the flames over time. This is useful against teams who might be playing in the open, as they get locked within the Motherload and become easy targets for Fuse and for his team. Couple this with Knuckle Clusters and grenade spam and it's an easy cleanup. It's worth noting that Fuse does lose a little bit of value with the Horizon nerf, but he might end up being a good counter to a potential passive bunker meta. And hey, I know you think that the controversial picks were over. I know that you think that, okay, Ottr has put all the weird takes out there, it's gonna be smooth sailing, I already know which ones he's gonna tell me next, but we're just getting started because next up is Wattson, baby! Staying in the B tier while Caustic becomes A tier, but we're talking about Wattson here. Wattson already was outclassed by Caustic as he simply provided better defensive abilities. Her passive Spark of Genius gives her a passive shield heal after not taking damage and allows her to store 2 ultimate accelerants per inventory slot. Her tactical allows her to set up defensive fences with up to 12 nodes active at a time, and the nodes can be broken but also be placed out of line of sight from the aggressor to make it harder to push in, and her ultimate couples this by destroying any grenade thrown in its line of sight, as well as passively regenerating your team's shields and speeding up your fence's cooldown. But as I said, Wattson was already inferior to Caustic, meaning that she's much easier to siege, and she just got a lot weaker with this bug fix, meaning that Crypto's EMP now takes out her defensive pylon. This won't matter if nobody plays Crypto, but I think it's significant enough to cement her position 1 tier below Caustic as far as these defensive legends go. The last legend on his list could have made A tier, but I'll use her to top off the B tier instead. Loba. Her passive Eye for Quality allows her to see epic and legendary loot through walls up to 112 meters away, which gives her an edge when contesting other teams and generally rotating around with or without actually looting. Her tactical allows her to teleport to hard to reach places or escaping trouble, and it can also be used to get on high ground, run away, or squeeze into houses or windows. But the main reason she's so high up this list is her ultimate. The Black Market Boutique is a portable, placeable device that allows you to teleport nearby loot to your inventory, and each friendly or enemy legend can can take up to 2 items each or unlimited amounts of ammo. Loba is the core legend in a so-called sustain composition and a great counter to bunker meta, and she can use the Black Market Boutique to keep her own team and herself sustained while stealing loot from surrounding teams and continuing to poke. And this might be even more useful just in case we're heading into a sniper rifle meta as well. And before we head into the A tier, I just want to add that I did ask you guys for your input and release an earlier version of this list to my Discord and to my Twitter. And if you guys want to see the lists earlier or provide your input, I will be doing the exact same for tomorrow's video covering the weapon tier list. So if you guys don't want to miss that, make sure to follow me on Twitter and or join the Discord at discord.gg/Ottr. Moving on to the A tier are legends that are the best of their kind, but still may not be good enough to be picked on every single team or composition. There are currently 2 legends in this tier, so let's just start off with Caustic. Caustic is a superior defensive bunker legend because his barrels and his gas stays up for a hell of a lot longer than Wattson's meek fences and can also block walls while tanking crypto CMP. His passive goes with his gas kit and makes Caustic immune to the effects of any Nox gas, and enemies inside of the Nox gas from your own traps or ultimate will be highlighted. The passive makes Caustic incredibly useful if he is the only Caustic, and a actually must pick if many other teams are running him, especially in the final 2 rings. His tactical, as previously mentioned, places up to 6 gas canisters that release deadly Nox gas when shot or triggered by enemies. If triggered, the barrel will last for 11 seconds, and after the barrel expires or is destroyed after being activated, the gas will linger for 2 additional seconds. His ultimate Nox gas grenade blankets an entire area, usually the normal size of a room, in Nox gas for 15 seconds, damaging and slowing any enemies inside of it, much like the canister gas, acting as great cover to block the vision of enemies, and even allows you to make a full reset if things take a turn for the worse. There is literally no other legend that can stay alive for as long as Caustic, making him the best bunker legend in the game. The reason he's not in the S tier is because he's not nearly as strong in open areas, and there is limited amounts of houses and positions that he can play, along with all of the other playstyles that are coexisting in the meta, kind of softly cancelling him out. The second legend is at the peak of the A tier and would have stayed S tier if it wasn't for the nerfs this season, however insignificant they actually may be. We're talking about Valkyrie. Her passive jet fighter HUD received a smaller nerf as she can now scan Mirage's clones, and her active passive VTOL jets received a much larger nerf as she now gets a slow penalty if hit midair, and spamming the boosters will drain your fuel much faster. Her tactical also received a pretty big nerf with its effects lowered and its range dramatically decreased by over 30% as well, and her ultimate too received a nerf, making her large upwards a little bit slower and only going 90 meters into the air instead of the previous 135 meters. That being said, she still has a super overloaded kit, and just like Wraith will probably continue being useful for teams as long as her ultimate isn't vaulted, because it's just so good for getting out of a bad spot and rotating in over teams who may be holding out of zones, and it is just the best get out of jail free card for bad macro play. The only reason that she isn't in the S tier is because her entire kit was tuned to be a little bit more reasonable. And now, we're finally in the S tier, with the S standing for subscribe. If you're enjoying the videos, be like the 17.4% watching my videos and hit the subscribe button. We still have plenty of great content on the way on the daily for the new season, and it would be a shame if you missed it. Thank you. Let's start off with what the S tier really stands for, and that's of course Seer. Seer was the most overpowered legend in Season 13, making a resurgence into the meta after some ranked grinders and later on professional teams realized just how strong he was, and he went from being one of the least picked legends to one of the top picked legends. As previously mentioned, his passive allows for him to have a permanent and legal wall hack, his tactical is a much improved version of Bloodhound's tactical, and his ultimate gives his entire team information on anyone who might be moving around within the ultimate's dome for a serious amount of time. Seer received 0 changes this season, probably because Respawn started working on the changes much earlier in time before he was meta, and as such just remains in the S tier. But the thing is, Seer is not only unchanged, but the meta changes might end up making him even better. Last season, aggressive teams found that Seer coupled with Maggie made them both an unstoppable combo, as you could deal a lot of damage to a team, use Seer tactical when they're behind cover, and then use Maggie's riot drill to deal damage behind the wall as you move up with her wrecking ball. This playstyle is even better when a lot of teams are playing defensively or passive, as they kind of just act as sardines in a can for you to break open and feast on, I guess. And the thing is, Maggie is another legend who jumped into the S tier this season. Maggie's passive temporarily highlights enemies that you've damaged, giving you a wall hack and a clear sight picture when you are fighting someone. The silhouettes are also visible through walls and obstacles for an entire second. She also runs as fast with a shotgun out as she would with her weapons holstered, which also affects when you aim down sights, meaning that there's an effective ATS speed penalty of 0% when compared to other weapons. Combine this with the fact that shotguns are at a crazy level right now, especially with the EVA 8, and you got an S tier Maggie. Her tactical riot drill received a buff and now travels twice as fast as normal. This ability fires a drill that attaches to an obstacle obstacle and burns enemies on the other side of it for 160 damage over 9 seconds, and also deals damage to player-placed objects or doors. What people don't know about the riot drill is that this faster projectile speed buff means that its effective range has more than doubled, and it has nearly no drop. And actually, if you hit an enemy with the riot drill, it will deal about 9 damage and fall off of them. So if you need to snipe someone for 10 damage across the map, use the drill, believe me. But the hugest change to Maggie comes with her ultimate, because apparently the Wrecking Ball was really bugged, and not only did it not stun enemies as it should when they're hit, but it also was supposed to blind them. This now works, and it makes it a lot more oppressive to deal with. It also travels twice as far, deals damage to player-made objects, and most importantly, you might already have heard of this, it breaks Gibraltar's bubble, effectively dealing the final blow to his place in the meta. Maggie and Seer are a god tier combo, and she's also a great way to deal with the other legend that's reaching S tier, which is Newcastle. Newcastle fills the void left by Gibraltar losing his relevance, and on top of that has received some pretty significant buffs. I mean, just look at how fast he runs when reviving. Okay, just kidding. But his movement speed when reviving has been increased, as well as his turn speed, making him the support legend with the best revive passive, especially when you keep in mind what the rest of his kit does. The tactical mobile shield is a drone that projects a large shield in front of it. This large shield can be broken, but as of this patch, not only has 350 health, it's been buffed to 500. It also moves twice as fast as before, making it a lot more useful to play around with mid-fight. You can combine the mobile shield with your revive shield to basically guarantee that you get a res off. And finally, his ultimate castle wall allows Newcastle to jump either vertically, horizontally within 35 meters, or to a teammate 75 meters away. When landing, Newcastle places a defensive castle wall in the direction that he's looking, with the outer side having an electric fence effect. If enemies step into this fence, they will get slowed. But this also received a buff, and enemies touching the electric fence will not only get more slowed than previously, but their aim will also be slowed as if they got hit by an arc star, making the shield even more versatile and viable in close range situations. Each partition in Newcastle's wall has 750 health and lasts forever unless destroyed, meaning Newcastle can create space and cover wherever in the map, and it lasts essentially forever because nobody has the resources to break the ultimate in the sweatier lobbies. That doesn't mean it's impossible, it's just not worth to waste ammo on that. Newcastle was already starting to see a little bit of play by Hunter and Thieves in the ALGS, and definitely will be played a lot more now. If you guys want more tips, you should check out this video with 15 tips for season 14. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.